Welcome back to the Suncoast Magazine. It is a great pleasure to welcome our next guest on the program, Christopher Kennedy Lawford, joining us right now. Actor, author, and, of course, a member of the famous Kennedy family is joining us now. He has some important health information he wanted to talk to us about. And, Chris, thanks for being with us today in Sarasota. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. It's good to be here. It's a little colder up here in New York.
I know. We were just talking with singer Andrea Marcovici, who's also up there. But it's a nice time to be up in New York, though, isn't it, during the holidays?
It's beautiful. And actually, it's warm. You know, there's global warming going on, so it's a little warmer up here.
One of the benefits, right?
Yeah.
If you want to say there's a benefit to it.
There you go.
Well, I know you want to talk about kind of an important topic, a very serious topic, hepatitis C testing. Talk a little bit about what got you involved with this.
Well, actually, this is a huge health issue in the United States today, and I've been working on a public awareness campaign for the last couple of months called Hep C Stat. It's basically to educate people. People don't realize in 2001, I went for a routine physical with a doctor who knew my history and was smart enough to look at this thing. Otherwise, I would never have been tested. He tested me for hepatitis C. It turned out I had it. I had no idea that I had it because this is a disease that affects about 4 million people in the United States today. 70% of them have no idea that they have it. And the reason for that is because the incubation period for this illness is 15 to 20 years before it starts affecting your liver, which is what it does. And there are no symptoms until your liver really is so sick it's really beyond help. So for someone like me, I went in for a routine physical, didn't ask for the test. My doctor was smart enough to test me anyways, and it turned out I had it. I was treated in 2002. And I was basically rendered virus-free and have been for the last 4 years. The issues people have to think about when they think about hepatitis C are the risk factors, and that's what we're trying to get people to pay attention to. And there are very specific risk factors. If you have been an IV drug user or an inhalant drug user, even if you just did it once, and even if you did it 20 years ago, you need to get tested. If you've had a tattoo, in unsanitary conditions, you should be tested. Or if you've had a blood transfusion prior to 1992, you should be tested. And it's a very simple test. It's very inexpensive. You can get it with your healthcare professional, and they go in. It's $40. They do the test. It comes back. If it comes back positive, you should see a liver specialist about whether or not to be treated. This is a very serious illness. It's at epidemic proportions in the United States today. Just to give you some reference for this, we estimate 4 million people who are walking around with hepatitis C. That's 4 times the number of HIV people. So it's a huge problem, and it's one that can be treated. That's the good news. There's good treatment out there. It's available to people. So they just need to go, if they can identify those risk factors, and if they need more information, we have a website called hepcstat.com, HEPCSTAT.com.
Well, that's great. And the treatment you went through has gotten rid of the virus, you said, right?
Right, yeah. No, I started the treatment. The treatment is basically a 6 to 12-month protocol, depending on, your liver specialist will determine, what depending on your genotype and how advanced your case is, they'll treat you for a specific amount of time. It's usually 6 to 12 months. It's not an easy treatment. It's a combination of two drugs. One is interferon, which is a pretty powerful drug, and another one is an antiviral called ribavirin. You take the interferon once weekly. It's injectable, and then the ribavirin you take twice daily. And it's a difficult treatment, but not that difficult. I mean, it makes you feel like you have the flu a couple days a week. It's sort of a bad cold. You get used to it. I did. I didn't go to bed for 11 months. I did it for 11 months. I maintained an active lifestyle. I was committed to treating this illness. I was committed to it working for me, and it did.
Well, that's great. I know it's when you hear the word hepatitis, people they get scared just hearing or seeing the word, but it's something if you catch it early, like you said, it is treatable. So that's
right.
That's good news.
I've noticed just in the last 4 years. I do a lot of work in recovery. I'm sober 20 years, and I spend a lot of time with people in that community, and that's a community that's very, very hard hit by this illness. And I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years a marked increase in awareness, in people with the disease, and in actual and in treatment, and in people who didn't get treated who die. I mean, this disease leads to liver failure. It leads to cirrhosis. It leads, it's the number one cause of liver transplants. It leads to liver cancer. It's not a thing to mess with. So, as I said, if you've got one of these risk factors, you should just get tested and put your mind at ease.
Christopher Kennedy Lawford joining us on the program today. And I saw you most recently on, I guess you were on Larry King, talking about the book you wrote recently. Does it still surprise you how many people want to know the stories about your family?
Yeah, well, it's great. There are a lot of people who love my family out there, and there's some people who don't. But I writing Symptoms of Withdrawal, which was my memoir, was a great sort of gift to me in a lot of ways. And the response from people in terms of loving to read about growing up in my family, in the Kennedy family, or with my father, with the Rat Pack and all of that in Hollywood, they love that. The greatest gift, however, from Symptoms of Withdrawal was a response from the recovery community in terms of people, because a lot of my story is about addiction and recovery, and and that's a large part of my story, and that message really reverberated out in the world and came back in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this Hep C Stat campaign is because somebody who worked for one of the pharmaceuticals that is interested in treating this actually read my book and called me one day and said, I work for Roche. Would you be interested in in doing a public awareness campaign? And she educated me about the epidemic proportions of hepatitis C. So a lot of good came out of reading my book, and America has treated my family so well, and it's been a great joy to go out there and sell the book.
Yeah, it really was one of those books that is going to help people as well. It's not just the stories you tell about the family, but like you said, the recovery, which a lot of people go through that. So I think having a person of your fame being able to talk about that, which I know it wasn't easy for you, but I guess the reward is being able to talk about it helps other people.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I was with my cousin Patrick Kennedy the other day, who's a congressman who's had, some issues himself with this, and he's spent the last, 20 years working on mental health issues and addiction issues in the United States Congress. And this is not an easy, I was just in Canada last week. I gave a speech for the Canadian Psychiatric Research Foundation, and mental illness and addiction and these kinds of issues, hepatitis C, these kinds of issues have such a stigma around them. People have a real difficult time talking about it, and there isn't a person that I know that's not impacted in some way by these issues. Whether they know somebody who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, or they have some mental illness in their family, or and they just don't talk about it because it's embarrassing, because they don't understand it, because they're afraid of it. And the truth is that we don't need to be. These are things that need to be talked about, that need to be treated. Resources need to be committed to these issues. And if I can help a little bit in all of that, I'm glad to do it.
You working on anything as far as doing some acting, Chris?
I am. I actually just finished another movie with Anthony Hopkins called Slipstream, which is a movie that Tony Hopkins wrote and directed. It's just a wonderful movie about a a man's life, and played by Anthony Hopkins. Christian Slater's in it, John Turturro.
Oh, great cast.
Cameron Manheim, a really amazing ensemble cast. We're going to be at Sundance, the Sundance Film Festival in January. We premiere there, and so I'm going to go up and do that. I worked all summer in the Mojave Desert.
Wow.
Where it's very, very hot. It was 158 degrees on the ground.
Oh, boy. There's global warming for you there.
Making movies in that kind of weather. That's tough.
That's global warming there for you.
There you go.
Well, I just got one comment about your dad. I always enjoyed being able to see some of his films, which they show on TCM and
right.
cable TV. And Royal Wedding was one of my favorites that he did.
Yeah.
And Good News as well. Great. I think underrated in a sense too. I mean, it's as famous as your dad was. I think a bit underrated as a fine actor. I really believe.
Well,
that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, my dad really was an amazing talent. I don't have his. He worked at it very hard. He was a child actor and worked real hard at it. Could sing and dance, and today a lot of the actors don't have the chops that a lot of those guys did in the early days because they grew up in the studio system, or they were trained in theater, and they learned all of the things that people learn. That's why the English are so good. They have this tradition of being trained in the theater, and a lot of us in America, just hop on a plane and go out there and think we're going to become movie stars. We don't do the training, and so my dad really was a good actor and worked hard at it and did some good movies. Somebody was telling me the other day that one of their favorite movies is a movie called Exodus, which is just amazing. Yeah. Great movie, and he's remembered by some of us.
Oh, no question. Did you ever
My kids have no idea. They're like, yeah, that's the dark ages to them.
Did you ever get a chance to see any of the performances in Vegas with the Rat Pack? Or were you too young?
Actually, some of the stories I talk about in Symptoms of Withdrawal were, going to Vegas and seeing. I went up there when I was, I think, 6 years old, and I went up. First, I went to see my dad and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis do a movie called Sergeant 3, which was basically cowboys and Indians. And then I went up to Vegas to see them shooting Ocean's 11. And I remember getting up there, and we went to the show at night. They would do the Rat Pack show at night at the Sands, and they would shoot the movie during the day. And I remember going there and watching them, and they just had so much fun, these guys. I mean, they looked like they're having fun. They were having fun. And I could see that, even as a kid. And, of course, the craft service table was the other thing that I loved about the movie set. I thought, if I can make a living playing cowboys and Indians or dressing up in cool suits and trying to steal all the money in the Vegas casinos and eat candy all day on a table for free, I want to do that when I grow up.
We've had Dean Martin's daughter, several times, and she told some great stories too. And she made the same point. They all were definitely having fun. It was not an act. I mean, they really enjoyed each other.
They had a really good time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for a lot of them, they didn't continue to have fun.
Sure.
And that's a thing that's really interesting for people to see. That sometimes all of that stuff, and that's one of the other messages I go out and talk about is that all the stuff out there in the world, it's all good and everything, but it has a cost.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely has a cost, and those guys paid a high price for it. They really did. They all paid a high price. They didn't die happy, any of them.
Yeah, your dad.
And that's too bad, because they had it all. They had grace, they had talent, they had money, they had looks, they had these amazing lives, and yet they were kind of miserable at the end, most of them, from what I understand.
Yeah, your dad. Dad obviously had some problems later in life, well documented,
and he tried. And I think, for me, I write about this. My dad died in 1985 of alcoholism, and I got sober in 1986, and I absolutely believe that his death was one of the factors that got me sober. And I carry my sobriety every day because of him and with him.
Mm-hmm.
And my cousin David, because, when you're talking about addiction, this is an illness that, kills most people. And most people never get what I've gotten. And I am grateful for it every single day, and I'm convinced that the people that did die are the reason why those of us that do get sober are able to stay sober.
Yeah, tremendous story. Give out the website once again, Chris, for the hepatitis.
It's hepcstat.com, HEPCSTAT, hepcstat.com. Go there. Anybody go out there, they can check it out and find out everything they need to know about hepatitis C and whether they've got one of the risk factors, and if they do, they got to get tested.
Great. Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Chris. Hope we can do it again, and if you're ever down this way in Sarasota, we'd love to meet you in person.
I love that.
Great. Christopher Kennedy
Thanks
Lawford,
so
our
much.
guest. Thank you, Chris. We'll take a break. Be right back.